Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Victoria and this is Time and Tenderness. I'm going to be trying a new format of content today in a more of a speaking style video. I'm not always able to film because of the demands of motherhood with a child and being pregnant again, but I did want to bring this topic to you as it is a topic that has been weighing on my mind for quite some time now. And that is the topic of, are you the reason you have no village? It takes a village to raise a child. This very popular and very common proverb has been shared many, many times throughout the years. It has become so common that its origins have been lost to history and time. Up until recent years, this proverb rang true for many. It did take a village to raise a child. In generations past, parents had more community support. They had what appeared to be more supportive relatives, more supportive friends, and more supportive extended family who were willing to contribute to some of the workload involved in raising a child. It also felt like public spaces in general were more welcoming to families and children. But now that seems to no longer be the case for many. Within a generation, it seems like the village has imploded upon itself, and children are expected to not be seen and not be heard from. What happened? Where did it all go wrong? And most importantly, is it your fault? Now, before you grab your torches and pitchforks and get mad at me for daring to suggest that the lack of village might be self-inflicted, I want to talk about our society as a whole, because societal opinions and expectations do ultimately play into the choices that we make. Let's go back to actual village life, pre-industrial revolution. Now, I'm not a historian. My knowledge about these things is very superficial, but here are my observations. This is just going to be a very condensed history lesson. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, it was not uncommon for someone to live their entire life within a small radius of where they were born. Families stayed together much longer, oftentimes in multi-generational living situations. Families also commonly raised their children together communally, and there were one-room schoolhouses where children of different ages learned and associated together. And before the Prussian model of education was implemented as the standard throughout the country, many schools operated at the convenience of the community. Time was allotted for the children to participate in planting and harvesting crops and other necessary tasks involved in supporting the community as a whole. Then the Industrial Revolution happened, and we saw a mass exodus of people leaving their small villages and towns for big cities where there was more stable work and income. This was really the first time a large majority of families started to live away from their extended families and communities that they were born into. It is at this point that we see capitalism start to take and grab hold firmly of everyday life. We had these big companies that asserted their power and dominance by owning the buildings that their employees lived in, and even the local mercantile shops and taverns too. These companies started to strip away the traditional village for a more streamlined corporate substitute. These big companies owned their employees in every sense except literal. We can see that when we look into what working life was like before workers' rights unions got involved, and even then, it took a lot of innocent people losing their lives or limb due to company negligence. These companies even started encouraging child labor, stripping families even further and further apart. Fortunately, the pendulum of life swung back the other way once workers' unions and the government got involved, setting safety standards and standards for children. We then now see a semi-return back to a more traditional village lifestyle. It will never return to what it was pre-industrial revolution, but the roots again start to grow and flourish. Now, of course, we have things like the Great Depression that kind of forced people both into poverty and back into communal lifestyle for the sake of survival, but those original roots of village life were still there. We see more families start to stay put and multiple generations start to work for the same companies. And these companies set the standard for the income of one person to support a family. It is at this point that we see that a man could work a 9-to-5 job while his wife stays home and cares for the house, and his singular income supports that family. Because at that point, companies realized that if they supported families just enough, they could ensure that a new generation of employees be brought up. But then World War II happened, and all the men got shipped off to war, and women took their places. When the war ended, men got their jobs back and everything returned to the status quo as it was before, but that old itch that society felt at the start of the Industrial Revolution was starting to flare up again. What was that itch? Well, to put it plainly, it was greed. People left their family and ancestral villages for a better life, which there was nothing wrong with. They had to do what they had to do to survive, but in doing so, it left room for the plague of greed to grow amongst a small minority. That minority being the owners of these big corporations the people were flocking to. These corporations had unlimited power in the 1800s and early 1900s. They got knocked down a few pedestals by the government, but just like any good business, they are always looking to turn a profit to swing things to their own advantage. Now we enter the 1960s through 1980s. There was huge movements that took place in this time period. Movements like the Civil Rights Movement, the feminist movements, and both movements accomplished very important things and gave us the rights and privileges we have today. But now, at this point, more money comes into play. Companies start realizing that they can incorporate what's called planned obsolescence, meaning the products or services they provide don't last as long or are not of as a great quality as they once were, forcing people to buy more. And when you have to buy more, you have to work more. Thus, more women started entering the workforce. But still, the village culture still existed. At this point, it just seemed to evolve. Jobs were still plentiful, many families could still go into the same industries together, sons following the footsteps of their fathers, so on and so forth. And the cultivation of the village at this point was predominantly done by women. Women who at that point either didn't have to work or didn't have to work full time. The public in general was still very friendly towards children. If we look at pop culture in this time period, we see very family-focused messaging through especially some of the sitcoms that were most popular during that time period. Sitcoms like Full House, The Cosby Show, Family Matters, and Married with Children. In the 1990s, however, we now reach a period of excess. People are wealthier than they have ever been before. They're sticking to the same model of life that their parents stuck to, which was to go to school, get good grades, go to a good college, and get a good job in a quote-unquote good industry. And this mindset was applied to everyone. This pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality and this thought process of you can do it, you don't need to rely on anyone else. But that thought process might have worked for the previous generations, but they were blind to the fact that they still had a village. Society was still accepting of their children and of growing a family. We then see the village start to collapse rapidly with the millennial generation. So now we are pretty much at present day. We now have an extremely expensive world to live in, people who are still in power who believe in the age-old adage of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and corporations who want to keep things in the black. Now, where we had greed coming into play, we now have selfishness. And typically selfishness and greed go hand in hand, but in this case, the selfishness is born out of exhaustion. Looking back, many people are remembering how they had grandparents who watched them, and aunts and uncles who cared for them, and family and friends when they were children. But now all those same people are now unavailable because everyone is working. Well, now people are looking around and saying, well, my parents they're just selfish. They don't want to take care of their grandkids like my grandparents took care of me, so I'm just going to rely on myself, me, myself, and I. So not only are people accusing others of being selfish, but they are turning those scorned feelings into more selfishness by choosing to only rely on themselves. Now people have become hyper-independent, and this mentality of hyper-independence was thrust upon us at a very young age. Think back to your school years and all those times you had to do group activities. Chances are you had at least one or two experiences of putting a ton of work into your project while one or two members of the group did nothing. Yet those one or two members still got awarded the same credit as you. In theory, encouraging group activities is supposed to foster community reliance, but when you don't hold those who slack off accountable for their laziness, that instead sends the messaging of being a team player doesn't really matter, just take care of yourself and get on with life. If you've made it this far in my discussion, you'll realize that capitalism has been the cancer that has caused the very, very slow demise of the village. But now we have the final nail in the coffin. There is still hope for having a village. We just need to make sure we aren't inadvertently hammering in that final nail ourselves. What is that final nail? Holding boundaries and going no contact. Now, again, before you grab your pitchforks, listen to what I have to say. I am not talking about people who have legitimate reasons to hold a boundary or go no contact with a family member. I am rather cautioning us to not use these courses of action lightly or as an easy way out when faced with a minor adversity or discomfort. Now, we have made huge strides in the last 100 years when it comes to many, many things. One of those things is how we view and handle mental health. Nowadays, people are much more open about their mental health struggles and what they go through, and that is a very good thing. No longer are people having to suffer in silence, but unfortunately, some people are taking things too far. Some have become to equate hard with being bad. It is part of our human nature to want to take the path of least resistance. We are often like water in that regard, but nowadays people are under a record level of stress, unlike any other generation has ever seen. So it's only natural that people want to seek out ease and comfort in an otherwise hectic and crazy world. Unfortunately, some have done that by inadvertently sacrificing their own village of support in the name of mental health or self-care. What do I mean? Well, some people just aren't willing to be villagers anymore. Some people are flaky. They don't hold appointments or let their yes mean yes. They often aren't the first to reach out to others to support them, yet they still expect others to be at their beck and call when they need them. Some people go as far as to not hold any grace or understanding when someone else has a difference of opinion or does things slightly differently than they might do. Now, of course, in this instance, if you are absolutely in the right to not want to be around someone who is outright mean or disrespectful towards you. But simply because something is different doesn't always necessarily mean bad. It's just different. So now the final nail to the ultimate death of the village is in our hands. We can now either choose to hammer it in place, or we can choose to toss it aside and work on our village and provide it the life-giving support that capitalism has sucked it dry of. What is that support? Be a villager. Now, I know our world is crazy and hectic, as I mentioned before, but being a villager takes only small things. Sending a thinking of you card to a family friend or a family member, talking on the phone or going out to lunch, spending time with people. And if you see a need that someone has, try and fill it within what is reasonable for you to do so. Also, try and widen out. Spend time with people who are older than you. From them, you can learn tidbits of information, wisdom, and advice that might help you. But also, don't be quick to write someone off simply because they are different. Remember, different doesn't always mean bad. Have an open mind, practice empathy and grace with others, treat others how you would want to be treated. Now, if your first reaction to these tidbits of advice is to say, but, then I suggest you start to work on humility first and foremost. Many people view humility as a bad thing, but it isn't. Humility is the ultimate key to building up a village because you need others. Humility means that you view others as superior to you, which, when you are in a position of needing support or help, you do need to humble yourself into accepting that support from others. There are a multitude of reasons why the village has dissipated in recent years, but it can still be salvaged. It is up to each and every one of us to put aside the social conditioning of independence, greed, and selfishness that has been prevalent for decades, and to put on characteristics of empathy, grace, and humility. Your village is out there. You've just been lied to by powers bigger than you realize. Well, friends, thank you so much for joining me on this new type of content format that I have come up with. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!